The chill of late autumn, 1863, did not just cling to the air. It seeped into the very soul of the Union, a palpable miasma of despair that flowed from the Cumberland Plateau down the telegraph wires to the very corridors of power in Washington. The war, a gaping wound that had bled the nation for 2 long years, seemed to have found its terminus not in a grand battlefield, but in the grim, starving confines of a small, strategically cursed Tennessee city, Chattanooga. The name itself, a melodic whisper from the Cherokee for rock coming to a point, now tasted of ash, despair, and the metallic tang of imminent defeat. Nestled in a topographical bowl carved by the serpentine bends of the Tennessee River, surrounded by the towering, unforgiving ramparts of Lookout Mountain and Missionary Ridge, the city was not a prize, it was a prison, a natural fortress turned into a Union tomb. Inside, trapped by his own stunning defeat at Chickamauga just weeks prior, was Major General William S. Rosecrans and his Army of the Cumberland, its spirit broken, its strategic nerves severed, its supplies cut, its men reduced to a state of shocking deprivation, boiling leather and eating their own pack mules to stave off starvation. The Confederates, under the command of the victor of Chickamauga, General Braxton Bragg, held the high ground in an unassailable, almost arrogant grip. They controlled the river, the Western and Atlantic Railroad, the Nashville and Chattanooga line, and every conceivable line of supply. From their dizzying perches, they looked down upon the Union Army, not as an enemy to be fought, but as a problem to be starved into submission, a slow, grinding process that required minimal Confederate bloodshed. In Washington, a pall of defeatism hung over the Capitol, thick as wood smoke. The Copperhead movement, the vocal faction of Northern Democrats advocating for an immediate peace treaty with the Confederacy, gained momentum with every passing day of the siege, their newspapers demanding an end to Lincoln's war at any cost. For President Abraham Lincoln, the political calculus was dire, a nightmare scenario unfolding in real time. 1864 was an election year, and the war-weary electorate would not tolerate a narrative of perpetual, bloody failure and strategic incompetence. The Confederacy, with its victory at Chickamauga and the ensuing entrapment of a major Union army, was on the cusp of a political and military victory so profound it could shatter the Union's will to fight, force diplomatic recognition from European powers, and secure its independence. All eyes, from the White House to the capitals of Europe, were fixed on that beleaguered city in Tennessee. All hopes and all fears converged there in that river valley, a microcosm of the entire war's fate. What the Confederates on their mountain tops could not see, however, peering through their field glasses from the crest of Lookout Mountain, was the faint, distant spark of a response being orchestrated with frantic, almost chaotic urgency from Washington. Lincoln, a master of political pressure and a surprisingly adept student of military strategy, understood with chilling clarity that to lose Chattanooga was to lose the war, and with it, his presidency and the Union itself. In a move of strategic desperation that would redefine the entire Western theater, he invoked the powers of the newly passed Conscription Act to mobilize fresh manpower, but more importantly, he consolidated all Western forces under a single, unproven in overall command, and curiously unkempt commander, Ulysses S. Grant. The hero of Vicksburg, a man who understood the simple, brutal arithmetic of war, that victory goes to the side that can endure the most, was given a Herculean task: break the siege, break Bragg's army and resurrect a cause on the brink of collapse. Grant, a man of few words and relentless, undramatic action, immediately began to shift the pieces on the strategic board with the decisiveness that had become his trademark. He ordered the indomitable, fiercely intelligent William Tecumseh Sherman to disengage from the Mississippi and march his 4 divisions of the hardened Army of the Tennessee East with all possible speed, an overland journey of hundreds of miles that would test the very limits of human endurance and logistical planning. Simultaneously, he summoned the volatile, politically ambitious but brilliant fighter from the East, Joseph fighting Joe Hooker, with 2 corps from the Army of the Potomac, over 20,000 men to be rushed westward on a complex, fragile network of railroads, a logistical feat in itself. But railroads and marching legs could only move so fast. The first, most immediate problem was a literal one, a race against time and biology. How to feed an army that was starving to death now. The only existing supply line was a tortuous 60-mile wagon track through the treacherous mountains of Walden's Ridge, dubbed the cracker line for the paltry, crumbling hardtack rations it provided. It was a thread, a precarious capillary, and Bragg's army held the scissors, poised to snip it with a single, determined push. But what seemed like an insurmountable logistical weakness, a simple, fatal question of topography and enemy guns, was about to become the stage for one of the most audacious and brilliantly conceived operations of the entire war, a testament to the Union's growing mastery of combined arms warfare. The Tennessee River, which curled around the city like a languid brown moat, was the obvious and therefore heavily guarded avenue of approach. Bragg's artillery, including heavy Parrott rifles and nimble Napoleons, commanded every bend and straightaway from Raccoon Mountain to Lookout Point. Any attempt to run supplies by boat past these positions would be suicidal. Any attempt to bridge the river under their watchful gaze would be obliterated by a storm of Confederate iron and canister. The solution, when it came from the mind of Chief Engineer of the Army of the Cumberland, General William F. Baldy Smith, was not born of brute force, but of a cunning, almost artistic understanding of physics, geography, and the enemy's own psychological assumptions. Just west of Chattanooga, at a place called Brown's Ferry, the river made a sharp double S-bend, creating a blind spot shielded from the direct fire of Confederate batteries on Lookout Mountain. The north bank here was held by Union troops, the south by a single understrength brigade of Confederates. Smith's plan, a masterpiece of military sleight of hand, was to use the river itself as his concealed highway. Under the cover of a moonless night, he would float a brigade of hand-picked men from the much-maligned Army of the Cumberland down the river on a fleet of pontoon boats, silent as ghosts on the dark water, to seize a small but critical bridgehead on the southern bank at Brown's Ferry. Simultaneously, Hooker's force, having detrained at Bridgeport, Alabama, would execute a forced march overland from the west to link up with them, smashing through any Confederate resistance in Lookout Valley. Once the bridgehead was secure, engineers would throw a pontoon bridge across the river in a matter of hours, opening a direct, secure, water-level line to the waiting supply trains that Hooker was bringing down from Bridgeport. It was a plan of breathtaking risk, a complex ballet of moving parts that had to be executed with perfect timing and absolute secrecy. The night of October 26, 1863, was a canvas of tension and shadow, a void where the fate of tens of thousands would be decided. On the north bank of the Tennessee, shrouded in an inky blackness, 1,800 men of the Army of the Cumberland, under the stoic command of the reliable General William B. Hazen, boarded their specially constructed pontoon boats, each man a bundle of suppressed nerves and grim determination. They were ordered to maintain absolute tomb-like silence, no talking, no rattling of canteens or cartridge boxes, the oarlocks meticulously muffled with strips of torn wool and rags. The cold black water of the river swallowed them whole, the current pulling them inexorably downstream into the heart of the enemy's domain. For an hour that felt like an eternity, the only sounds were the gentle, rhythmic dip of oars, the whisper of the current against wooden hulls, and the frantic, percussive beating of 1,000 hearts. They were a floating dagger aimed directly at the jugular of the Confederate siege lines. They drifted past Confederate picket fires on the southern bank, so close the men could smell the enemy's cooking and hear their casual conversations, the mundane chatter of soldiers unaware that a storm was passing within feet of them, a single misplaced cough, a glint of stray moonlight on a bayonet, the accidental splash of an oar, and the entire operation would unravel into a catastrophic mid-river slaughter. But fortune, or the sheer discipline of the Union soldiers, favored them. They landed with a soft, grinding sound precisely at Brown's Ferry, surprising and overwhelming the small, drowsy Confederate picket force in a brief, sharp, and brutal firefight dominated by bayonets and clubbed muskets. By first light, through a low-hanging river fog, they had dug in, a precarious but firm foothold on the vital southern bank, their rifle pits facing outward against the inevitable counterattack. As the sun rose, burning away the mist, it illuminated not a disaster, but a miracle in the making. Union engineers, working with a speed born of desperation and pride, had the pontoon bridge operational and stable within hours, a slender thread of wooden rope spanning the Tennessee. At the same moment, the vanguard of Hooker's men, who had marched through the night, their boots caked with mud, arrived from the west. Their flags, the stars and stripes, visible on the hills of Lookout Valley, linking the corridor and driving back the confused Confederate forces under General Longstreet, sent to intercept them. The The Cracker Line was no longer a treacherous, starvation-level mountain path. It was a secured, water-level highway, a lifeline of victory. The opening of the Cracker Line was more than a mere logistical triumph. It was a profound psychological and strategic shockwave that reverberated through both armies with the force of a 20-pound Parrott shell. For the starving, hollow-eyed men in the faded blue uniforms within Chattanooga, the sight of the first steady, unending stream of supply wagons rolling confidently across that pontoon bridge, guarded by fresh troops from the east, was a sight that restored their belief not just in ultimate victory, but in their own government's fundamental ability and will to save them. Hardtack, coffee, salt pork, and dry socks became more than mere sustenance. They were tangible symbols of a renewed national will, physical proof that they had not been forgotten, that the United States of America could and would project its power to rescue its citizens in uniform. For the confident Braxton Bragg and his Confederate high command, watching from their luxurious perches on Lookout Mountain, it was an inexplicable and galling failure, a masterclass in Union initiative that made their own static defense look foolish. Their vaunted siege, their anaconda-like grip on the city, had been broken not by a grand, set-piece battle they were prepared to win, but by a single, brilliantly executed river crossing in the dead of night, a tactical move they had deemed impossible. The initiative, the lifeblood of military operations, had irrevocably shifted from the grey to the blue. Grant now had his army fed, reinforced, its morale soaring, and ready to take the offensive. But the strategic landscape, even with this success, remained dauntingly lethal. Bragg's army, though tactically outmaneuvered and morally demoralized by the failure to prevent the relief, still occupied what were considered by military engineers on both sides to be the most formidable defensive positions on the entire continent. To the west, Lookout Mountain rose like a medieval citadel, a 1,400-foot tall monolith, its slopes shrouded in dense autumn-bare forest and its cliffs sheer, its crest lined with artillery that could sweep the valley below. To the east, Missionary Ridge stretched for over 5 miles, a natural wall of earth and rock, its crest lined with 3 successive, intricately woven rows of Confederate trenches and artillery emplacements, each line covering the one below it in a terrifying crossfire. To attack either head-on was to invite a slaughter akin to Fredericksburg, a memory that haunted every Union soldier and commander. Bragg, ever confident in the impregnability of his terrain and dismissive of Grant's aggressiveness, believed any Union assault would be a welcome gift of suicide, a chance to destroy the Union armies once and for all on the slopes of his natural fortress. What followed over 3 days in late November was not a single, thunderous clash, but a symphony of violence conducted by Grant across the entire Chattanooga front, a multi-movement masterpiece that would showcase the evolving, modern and brutally effective warfare of the Union war machine. The opening movement began on the afternoon of November 23rd, a day of crisp, clear air and chilling portent, the kind of weather that made perfect killing light. In the center of the line, directly in front of the brooding mass of Missionary Ridge, lay a small, wooded knoll known as Orchard Knob. Held by a thin line of Confederate skirmishers from Stuart's division, it was a mere advanced outpost for their main line on the ridge itself, ostensibly to probe the enemy's strength and spirit, and to secure a better advanced line for the army. Grant ordered the imperturbable General George H., the Rock of Chickamauga, Thomas to have the Army of the Cumberland take the knoll. What happened next was not a probe, but a statement of intent, a declaration of renewed purpose. 20,000 Union soldiers, the very men who had been humiliated at Chickamauga, emerged from their works in a line of battle 2 miles wide, their blue coats brushed, their brass polished, their flags snapping in the wind, their fixed bayonets forming a glinting, steel-tipped wave of impending doom. It was a display of raw, intimidating power and precision that had been utterly absent since their retreat into Chattanooga. They advanced with a steady, disciplined cadence that spoke of recovered pride, sweeping over Orchard Knob in less than an hour against minimal resistance and digging in their own fieldworks under the very noses and cannons of the Confederates staring down from Missionary Ridge. The capture of the knoll was a minor tactical action in the grand scheme, but its psychological impact was seismic. It demonstrated to everyone, to Grant, to Bragg, to the men in the ranks, and to the watching nation, that the Army of the Cumberland was no longer a besieged, broken force. They were an offensive weapon, honed by suffering and hungry for redemption, a psychological transformation as critical as any shipment of rifles or rations. The next day, November 24th, the focus of the immense drama shifted to the seemingly impregnable fortress of Lookout Mountain, a place of legend and fear. In one of the most dramatic and instantly mythologized events of the entire war, Joseph Hooker was ordered to demonstrate against the Confederate left in force to prevent Bragg from shifting troops to reinforce his right against Sherman's impending attack. The weather, as if scripted for maximum theatrical effect, provided a surreal and disorienting backdrop, a dense, low-hanging fog and mist that wrapped the mountain in an ethereal, impenetrable cloak, obscuring the heights from the view of both armies in the valley below. Hooker's men, 3 divisions strong comprising over 10,000 soldiers, did not make the futile gesture of assaulting the sheer eastern cliffs. Instead, they executed a sweeping, powerful flanking maneuver, crossing Lookout Creek and climbing the lower, more gradual slopes on the western and northern sides of the mountain. What ensued was the legendary Battle Above the Clouds. The fighting was fierce, confused, and fragmented, a series of isolated, desperate struggles fought by regiments and brigades in the swirling, opaque mist. The crack of musketry, the deep-throated roar of cannon, and the high-pitched rebel yells and Union hurrahs were muffled and distorted by the fog, creating a disorienting, nightmarish soundscape where men fought shadows and the flash of enemy muskets was the only sure target. For the tens of thousands of Union and Confederate soldiers watching from the streets of Chattanooga and the lines on Missionary Ridge, the battle was an invisible, terrifying drama played out on a celestial stage, its progress marked only by the muffled, thunderous sounds of combat rolling down from the clouds and the occasional ghostly glimpse of a regimental flag, the stars and bars, or Old Glory, momentarily visible through a sudden break in the fog before being swallowed again by the grey void. By nightfall, through a combination of boldness and the Confederates' own disorganization and unclear command structure, Hooker's men had secured the mountain slopes and the Craven's House, and the Confederate division under General Carter L. Stevenson, outflanked and fearing complete entrapment, withdrew under cover of darkness. The Union flag was planted on the summit the following morning, a signal to all below that the Gibraltar of the Confederacy had fallen, its myth of invincibility shattered not by a direct assault, but by maneuver, weather, and sheer force. But the true war-altering cataclysm, the event that would seal the fate of the Western theater and ring the death knell for the Confederacy's strategic ambitions, was reserved for the following day, November 25th, on the steep, frozen slopes of Missionary Ridge. Grant's master plan, meticulously drawn, was for the main, decisive blow to be delivered by Sherman's 4 divisions on the Confederate far right, north of the ridge near the tunnel. But for hours, Sherman's veteran troops, hampered by a misreading of the terrain that left them assaulting a separate, equally defended hill north of their actual objective, threw themselves with grim determination against a stubbornly held defensive position at Tunnel Hill, defended with genius-level ferocity by General Patrick Kleben's legendary division. They made little progress at a terrible cost, the attack bogging down in a bloody stalemate. The battle was stagnating, and with daylight waning, the opportunity for a decisive victory was slipping away. To relieve the immense pressure on Sherman and prevent Bragg from reinforcing Cleburne with troops from his now quiet center, Grant ordered Thomas's Army of the Cumberland in the center to advance from their position on Orchard Knob and take the first line of Confederate rifle pits at the base of Missionary Ridge. It was a limited, supporting, and dangerously exposed objective, designed purely as a diversion. The men of the Cumberland, however, were not just following orders. They were men with a profound point to prove, to their comrades from the east, to their commanders, and to themselves. For weeks, they had been labelled as defeated, whipped, had endured the taunts and jeers of the Confederates looking down from their heights, had suffered the ultimate indignity of near starvation. As they charged forward with a roar, they took the first line of trenches at the base with ease, scattering the Confederate defenders. But then something primal snapped. Instead of halting and becoming pinned down under the murderous, plunging fire from the crest 200 feet above them, they did the unthinkable. Without orders, driven by a collective, furious instinct for vindication and a simple, brutal logic that staying at the base was death, and the only safety was overrunning the guns themselves, they continued the charge. They began to climb. 20,000 blue-clad soldiers, in a chaotic, glorious, and seemingly suicidal surge, started scrambling up the steep, frozen, timber-strewn face of Missionary Ridge, a human tidal wave crashing against a stone wall, aiming directly for the heart of the Confederate defense. From the Union command post on Orchard Knob, General Grant watched through his field glasses in stunned, then furious, disbelieving silence. "Thomas, who ordered those men up the ridge?" he demanded, his voice cold with anger and fear of the impending catastrophe that would wipe away all their gains. General Thomas, the Rock of Chickamauga, equally bewildered, replied with his characteristic calm, "I don't know. I did not." To the high command, it appeared to be a catastrophic, mass disobedience, a blind rush into a carefully prepared slaughterhouse that would see the Army of the Cumberland destroyed on the slopes. But what the commanders perceived from a distance as a fatal breakdown of discipline was, in reality, a moment of transcendent, spontaneous military fury and tactical brilliance. The Confederate defensive fire, plunging from above, was surprisingly ineffective. Their heavy artillery could not be depressed enough to hit the men swarming up the steep slope, and their musket fire, aimed downward, mostly whistled harmlessly over the attackers' heads. The Union soldiers, using the natural cover of the terrain, gullies and scattered trees, paused only briefly in the abandoned second-line trenches before continuing their relentless, scrambling ascent, their regimental colours always dancing ahead of them, drawing them upward. They were not a disciplined parade ground line, but a tidal wave of vengeance, a force of nature. They breached the crest at multiple points almost simultaneously, swarming over the parapets and into the main Confederate trenches, where the fighting devolved into a desperate, close-quarter melee of bayonets, clubbed muskets, and pure terror. The Confederate defense, which had seemed so formidable from below, crumbled in minutes, not from a flaw in the position, but from the shock of the utterly unexpected. The center, held by troops who had witnessed the fall of Lookout Mountain and now saw blue devils pouring over their own ramparts, broke completely. Panic, that most contagious of battlefield diseases, seized the Confederate ranks. Bragg's army, its center shattered, its commander's authority and nerve broken, fled in a disorganized, humiliating rout into the gathering twilight of northern Georgia, abandoning their cannons, their supplies, and their hope. The siege of Chattanooga was over, not just broken, but annihilated in one of the most dramatic and decisive assaults of the American Civil War. The ramifications of the stunning victory at Chattanooga were immediate, total, and echoed far beyond the smoke-shrouded valleys of Tennessee, fundamentally altering the political and strategic trajectory of the entire war. For the Confederacy, it was an unmitigated disaster of the highest order. The gateway to the Deep South was now not only secure in Union hands, but was flung wide open as a springboard for a devastating invasion of the Confederate heartland. The defeat was so complete, so tactically humiliating, that it shattered the already fragile reputation of General Braxton Bragg, who was forced to resign his command in disgrace. His military career effectively ended. More importantly, it opened the door for Sherman's devastating Atlanta campaign the following spring. The very campaign of relentless maneuver and destruction that would capture a critical Confederate industrial and rail hub and ultimately provide the tangible victory that secured Abraham Lincoln's re-election in November 1864. In the North, the news was electrifying, a tonic for a weary public. The victory, coming just over a month after the profound debacle of Chickamauga, was portrayed in the press as nothing less than a miracle, a testament to American resilience and the leadership of Ulysses S. Grant. The name Chattanooga became instantly synonymous with redemption, irresistible force, and the turning of the tide. The political effect was instantaneous and profound. The Copperhead movement, which had been gaining formidable strength with its message of negotiated peace and war failure, was utterly deflated. Its core argument, that the war was unwinnable, shattered by the image of Union soldiers scaling impossible heights and sending a rebel army flying in panic. How could one argue for peace from a position of weakness when the Union armies were demonstrating such overwhelming, audacious power? The victory provided a tangible, glorious, and emotionally resonant answer to the question of the war's immense cost and ultimate purpose. When the 1864 presidential election arrived, the Democratic candidate, former Union General George B. McClellan, ran on a platform of immediate peace and cessation of hostilities. But the voters, buoyed by the twin turning points at Gettysburg and Vicksburg, and now the spectacular, cinematic triumph at Chattanooga, saw a clear, if bloody, path to ultimate victory. They chose to stay the course, re-electing the man who had seen the crisis through from its darkest hours, the man who had entrusted Ulysses S. Grant with the tools and the authority to win. The rails and river routes to Chattanooga, built, secured, and fought for by the raw courage of common soldiers and the operational brilliance of their commanders, did not just carry supplies and reinforcements. They carried the fate of the Republic itself. They were the tracks and waterways that led directly to Abraham Lincoln's re-election, to the preservation of the Union, to the final bloody dawn of emancipation, and to the eventual painful rebirth of a reunited nation. What had seemed strategically impossible and politically fatal in the starving gloom of October had become, by the hard winter of 1863, an inevitable, thunderous march toward a new American destiny.